Okay, so we're live. Thank you, Carl, for accepting my invitation to kick off my webinar series on asking the hard questions. What legacy are we leaving our young? And you may wonder why I've come to that question at this juncture. I believe we're living in fast-changing, fast-paced times where we are technologically enveloped, and I really wonder where we are as emotional beings amidst it all. So that's what has brought me to this. And I followed your work, which crosses three boundaries really: psychology, business, and education. And there is a common ground, of course, because we're sentient beings and we come as the whole package into the workplace and the home, etc. So it was with that in mind that I've come to ask you to kick off this series for me. So Carl, would you like to tell me a little bit about your background? What has brought you to this point of being so well known and working with so many people right across the world?
Wow. Okay, I suppose it's quite a personal journey, really. I was very fortunate. I've been in development for a number of years, and psychology was my background, and I found myself being very fortunate enough to retire at the age of 39. So I was successful enough, and I always thought, you become a millionaire, and then that's all you need to do, and then you'd be really happy. And that's where I was wrong. And I remember a very poignant moment. And to give you a little bit of background, my wife is my best friend. My children are, very fantastic. I don't have to worry about money. And then I'm in the mall, and I found myself almost leaking. I think that's from a better word. It was like a deep cloud had come over. I felt quite isolated, and I just started to cry. And it was embarrassing. I felt embarrassment to begin with. There was a bit of surprise and concern, a little bit of fear as well. All of these emotions sort of overwhelmed me quite quickly, and I wasn't prepared for it. Then after that episode, I went through a series of meetings with psychiatrists over here, and I was prescribed medication, and they said you was clinically depressed. And it was a strange one for me because I didn't feel that I was allowed to be depressed. I didn't feel that it was permissible from a spiritual standpoint. You've been given everything else. This is not allowed. And then one of the things that my wife, who's also a psychologist, noticed was about the language and the finite language. And so one thing we started to do is we started to look at things. Well, this is what we teach. How can we fuse psychology into leadership, into entrepreneurship, into children's education? And so then we started to focus. And right at the beginning, I was inspired by a story about Alfred Nobel, the guy that invented dynamite. And with that inspiration, I wrote a story, an Addie the Alien story. So Addie the Alien is a series of books that I started to write for children. And the very first one that I wrote was all about this creature coming down and seeing Alfred Nobel, who was very arrogant. He liked his fast cars, well, as fast as they could be, I suppose, in the States with a 4 miles an hour. But he liked his new things, the restaurants, a very extravagant life. And then this is the part of the story that is factual. There was an obituary written, I think it was in the New York Times. So that was the fact. And nobody knows to this day who wrote this obituary. So Andy the Alien, as the character, takes that role. He writes this obituary. And in it, it says, Alfred Nobel, born this day, died this day. The merchant of death has passed away, with his legacy being, and it was all about, he invented dynamite, TNT, even though his brother-in-law passed away in an explosion in a factory, a very unfortunate accident. He still persevered, and it was all about money for him. However, Addie then is sitting with him at breakfast, and he reads this obituary and obviously spits out his cornflakes, and that's not how he wants to be remembered. It's like, do I want to be remembered as this? And if you know the story of Alfred Nobel, what he effectively does is he takes all his money away from the TNT industry, puts it into a Swedish university, a Swiss university, and creates the Nobel Prize. He's probably been the most influential person on this planet in the history of man, who has had such an impact, certainly in the modern day.
You reached a point in your late 30s where you said, no, it's just the beginning. I have work to do. Yeah?
Yes, I thought, I looked at as I'm writing this, I write down, and then there's stuff that we write for children, but also a business sense, we also we use the same stories. And then so as part of an exercise, I get people to write their own obituary. And it's quite morbid, but you're going to write your own obituary, and you're going to write it down from the perspective of your loved ones, your daughters, your fathers, your mothers, your colleagues. And what do people in general, what would they say about you? What would your obituary read as?
What's your legacy?
You can't say things like, oh, I would do something, I'm going to do this. It's what have you done today? Because you passed away.
Sure. When
I've done this in senior leadership lectures, it's been really, it's been emotional. I'm not going to say every single lecture I've done, but I would put it up there in the 90%. 90%, there's at least one or two criers in the room. It gets really emotional when they write this out.
Right.
And then I do something else. I then say, well, if you had 5 years, I'm going to give you another 5 years to live. And even they get emotional. Just 5 years, Mr. Garner, I want more. But just 5 years, what are you going to do?
Sure.
And it starts to reframe their mind. We start to reprogram their thinking. And then they start to say, this is how I would like my obituary to look like.
Sure.
And now we have a decision to make. So we have a decision to make to say, well, what would you do with that life? And as we start to evolve, the people in it start to go, I can start looking at steps and action plans to go forward and forward to this legacy driver. And then, I mean, there's lots of other programs alongside it where we do things like mission and vision statements, and we start to provide strap lines.
Yes.
And then I provided a strap line for myself. And the strap line I provided was that I feel that we are failing children on a global scale. And I don't think we're properly preparing them for life after school. And that's what I want to focus on. And then, so when I started to build this small community of educators and start to support schools, I would say, if you can ask yourself one question, then you won't have to ask anything else. And that simply is this: is it good for children? So whenever when I was a superintendent and a director of education, people would come to me, and I would continually, it was known as like, okay, he's going to ask the question, is it good for children? And it became quite monotonous. Is it good for children? So and that made a difference. It made a difference whether we fired someone, whether we hired someone, whether we involved them in the process of the curriculum development. Is it good for children? And that was the strap line that sort of empowered us to be the I think the success that we've become today, inshallah.
Yeah, and that's a question that keeps recurring, particularly since I myself left education and started working in psychology full time. And to my mind, there's a disconnect between the worlds of education and business. And I think they should synergize, because really the throughput from the education world ends up sitting in the workplace. But the workplace of tomorrow hasn't even been dreamt up yet. It's changing at such a pace. But it's nearly as though humanity will be pitched against AI and that technological advancement, but which emphasizes for me the importance of our emotionality and our emotional intelligence and our potential for empathy, etc., etc. So coming from that background of education and psychology myself, your tool, the emotional intelligence mapping tool, really grabbed my attention. A tool that's so simple and yet so complex, that can be used with children, excellent, and that can actually be brought into the business world, used with senior executives, used with teams. Talk to us a little about that. I'm really interested in that.
The map was originally designed with cognitive behavioral therapists in mind. This is my background in CBT. It was about how can we start having some conversation around language and the language that we use. And very often we verbalize. So we have a thought, first of all. You have an actuating thought or a stimulus that will happen. An action occurs, we have the thought, and then we verbalize how we feel about it. And the verbalization is not just about the map with this intensity model, but it's about everything we do. We ask questions. Can you forgive someone? And it's either a yes or a no. So forgiveness shouldn't be a conversation based on a finite language, a 0, 1. It's not binary. It's I have an amount of forgiveness to give. And the decision we have to make is not can we forgive, but can we look towards forgiveness and move towards it. And then CBT, we would help people through that by saying, well, you know, how much accountability can you take for your actions for the event that occurred? You could also have a look at it from the perspective of like, can you make excuses for the reason why this act occurred against you? You know, and then we start moving, and then this way we move towards, so we start loving more and hating a little less. So we moved away from binary. Now the map was something which was,
I immediately thought of the underground, the underground in London. I just saw the map and I said, God, so tell me, yeah.
So, okay, so the familiarity plays a part in whether we have buy-in. So if you look at something and you like it, then you can start believing in it and its credibility. When I first looked at this was from, like you said, London Underground. So it wasn't quite London Underground. It goes back further. So the original London Underground map looked like a plate of spaghetti. Sure. And it was very, very complicated. So you look, because it was done topographically.
Sure.
So then this cartographer came in called Harry Beck. Now Beck designed what he calls this mapping method. So this mapping methodology is used in London Underground, New York Metro. I know the one in Dubai. In fact, I think every metro or train system is now based on this Harry Beck mapping system. And what he said he wanted to create something. He wanted to simplify the complicated. And when you consider that we have 86 billion neurons in our brain and all the complications of the hormones, the chemicals that are released that affect our happiness and well-being, it only makes sense that we should try and simplify the use of our language. And so the map was a way of look at a word and you could see how intensity level was on it. So if I had a look at, for example, this area here is the anger line. So the anger line looks at, and on the very outskirts, it has rage. And it's like, well, if you think about any emotion that you've had that has an element of anger in it, when was you last angry? What made you so upset? So if you was to think about something from your client base or from your students at the university, when were they last angry? But I can even take this to an extreme level. If I was to slap someone in the face, I imagine that they would be having aggressive tendencies, maybe going into rage themselves because of the injustice that had taken place. But at the very beginning here, we have the word confused. And this is the foundation of the intensity of the anger line. If we can eradicate the building block of confusion, we can minimize the intensity of anger. So let's try that with the extreme case, what I just mentioned, the slapping of the face. How can we take away confusion? Well, taking away confusion could be asking a question. Why did you do that? And if I had explained the reason why I slapped you in the face was because there was a scorpion. I'm saying that out of context. Here in Saudi Arabia, a scorpion was there. I slapped the face because it was about to sting you. If it had have done, you could possibly have died. Do you believe that the intensity of anger would be minimized?
Yeah, I see.
And quite clearly it would. So in fact, there is any situation where you're feeling anger, you jump to the building block of confusion and you attempt to eradicate confusion. So you ask why. Let's look at something simple of where you cannot immediately see the reason why. So you don't know Saudi Arabia, but when it comes to the driving over here, they're a little bit, or used to be, they're a little bit crazy. The driving, it's, so you get to traffic lights, and it is not unusual for someone to cut right up, go ahead of the traffic light, and just put their car like this ahead of you.
Right.
And for me, from the UK, this is ridiculous, and I get very angry. And you could, you know, so if we were in the UK and it happened, you'd be like, what are you doing? There's an injustice that's taken part. But what I do now is I look at that, and then if I start to feel any intensity and of anger, I will look at the driver and think, well, I can't ask him, why did he do that? Because it could cause conflict. But what I could do is take away confusion. And that means sometimes making up excuses. So my go-to excuse with this particular one, is particularly if it's a guy, is that he's just about to go to the hospital. He's a young man. He's just about to be a new dad. And it's his first child. And he's going to have a baby boy. And he's really trying to get to the hospital as fast as he possibly can. So now, when I say that, I'm not justifying his actions. I'm saying, well, what could there be a reason for his actions? And I do that not because he deserves it for what he's done, but I deserve it. I'm in the vehicle. There's nothing I can do.
That's
I want to take away my intensity of anger for myself. So I focus on taking the building block of confusion, which includes making excuses.
Yes.
So taking the building block of confusion, making valid excuses. You can't. So by the way, I tried this with CBT, and one of my clients said, well, I know why she did that. It's because he's a dick. And I'm like, well, no, that's not an excuse. You're not excusing his behavior now. You're name calling and therefore adding to the value. So we have to have valid ability to take away confusion.
So really, this is a very good tool in the workplace for conflict management and for unraveling and why something has happened. And very often conflict arises because of lack of communication.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. We did a program here with the world's largest female university, looking at all their leaders. But the original program started off with conflict resolution. Just to give you an understanding of how big this university is, it's got its own hospitals, its libraries, a metro station. There are 40,000 students in this university. It's like a small village. In fact, it's a small town. It's not even a small village. It's a town. It's a good sized town.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so we started there with the deans of the colleges, etc. And the map now is an integral part of the university. It's all around. It's also in some of the hospitals as well.
It strikes me as you're speaking, the question arises for me: are we actually teaching our children the language of anxiety?
Wow, I think that's a brilliant question. I would suggest that we are much better at it than what we were. I think we're going in the right direction. I still think they need to bring in some top quality psychologists merged with educationalists who could have a better understanding, because the psychologists will give you the materials and the educationalists will talk about how to impart that knowledge so they can absorb it quicker, retain it for longer. So they need a merging of the two practices, I think, for it to be fully effective. I've done some work in schools, and I would suggest it's not a UK problem. I think it's a global problem. All the places that I've been around the world, I did a tour of South Africa. It was prevalent there. They would almost have the tools and pay lip service. And I think the problem is that the people at Ofsted and the people at the ministries, they have a very strong idea of what's required. And they want the mental well-being of all students. We want our children to be happy. That's absolute paramount. It's clear that we want that. However, what tends to happen, it's also in the private sector. The private sector is sort of driven by parents, by their customers. And their customers will want A grades. We want the grades.
Yes.
And the governments will also say, we need to demonstrate that there is a growth in the education system. How do we do that? The only way we do know how to do this is what we did 150 years ago. Let's do English, math, science, and it's all about conditioning with short-term memory. Let's have a look at those examinations. Yes. And I think that's the problem. So I think we need to try and, it's from the very top. We need to say, there needs to be a new measure of success. I would love to see, if you want a crossover from the business world, Kaplan. Kaplan was the professor that designed the balanced scorecard method, a very famous method that's used in business. Now, organizations look at that as everybody uses Kaplan's balanced scorecard now. So every major organization will have their KPIs, which will be balanced, not just by bums on seats or by the dollar bills, but it also looks at customer satisfaction, things that are not easy to accurately qualify. But they try to do this through surveys and how do our employees feel? Let's get a good satisfaction, because that ultimately translates into good business. And I think we need to do something similar for an educational model where we are focusing just as much on the emotional development of our children. And I would suggest we need to focus more on the processes of learning, more so than the actual results.
The outcomes, yeah. But that brings me, I suppose, to a question I have further down the line in relation to the reportage now that new entrants into the workplace are deficient in soft skills, and that they're finding it a real impediment to communication, to customer service, and to their whole notion of happiness in the workplace. And at the moment in Ireland, and I'm sure it's everywhere, that notion of resilience, there's a lot of verbiage used, and there's an attempt to teach resilience. And I would argue that resilience is caught, not taught. It's an experiential, and we learn vicariously by watching others. So by watching adults, their parents negotiate what happens in their lives, children are actually absorbing the skills to be resilient as they go through their own. But by protecting our children, we're in actual fact doing them a disservice. What do you think?
Do you know what? I can look back at my forefathers. You know, we had things that we had to go through. So they had the wars, the First World War, the Second World War, and wars, you know, generally all over the place, what they had to go through. And then we've not really had a lot. So from Generation Z, if you, the Gen Z learners, really, this new generation, it's almost like we've been through a time of trials and tribulations, and we want to protect our children. And I think we're doing them a disservice by doing that. It's something that I'm really, I'm also a father, so I can see it. There are times when I want to, you know, I know the answers, let me just give it to them. And I have to hold myself back. And if I'm holding myself back or struggling to do that, then I think the lay parent is also struggling to do that, probably even more so. So if anything, I would say that I'm doubly guilty because I know what I shouldn't be doing, and yet I still do it anyway. So I think it's something that we have to, I'm very fortunate. I've got a very strong wife.
Very good. But you know that notion of the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world? And I often ask this question, what hand is presently rocking the cradle? The fact, let's say, in the Western world, that mother and father must go out to work in order to meet all these financial demands, etc. And perhaps it's the childminder who sees the child taking his or her first step. I often go so far as to say, I think we're witnessing the loneliest generation to ever hit the face of the planet. And they're lonely from a sense of the absence, the physical absence of their parents who are so busy, etc. And it's interpreted in a skewed type of fashion as rejection. Let's say I grew up in a big family and my parents weren't all lovey-dovey and kissy-huggy, but their presence was their acceptance of us. Their work, everything we did together was their love. And I think that today's generation are missing that, the physical presence, the smell of the cooking and that warmth of home. And very often they're letting themselves in when they come home from school, and they're waiting till 6 or 7 when mom and dad come home and they're tired. And that, in a sense, nothing compensates for that. Taking the kids for 2 weeks on a wonderful holiday during the summer doesn't compensate for that absence that permeates everything in the life of the child. And that's where the screen has entered, the screen and all the gadgets. And there's an apparent sophistication about a young child's ability to use the screen because they may ultimately be more screen savvy than their parents. But in actual fact, we've gone down the wrong route with our children. What do you think? That was a mouthful, but what do you think?
Wow, but it was very deep. I loved what you said there about the hand that rocks the cradle. Now, I think as a generation, we are changing. I'm very fortunate to be in a position where, you know, I don't have to work, but I get to work. And I think that's the difference now.
Sure.
So now I get to go out and do what I do to, because it helps me mentally as well. And a lot of my time is focused. I mean, when I first retired, I went from doing 80 hours a week to next to 0. And it was like, I just want to be there with the kids. And we were doing all sorts. I didn't even need nannies. We didn't have nannies, didn't have maids. I said, you know, we are going to clean the door. And it was a joint effort. It took me about 3 times as long to do, but the kids were involved. And I thought that was a great way of building that connectivity with the family. Now I do have nannies. I brought nannies back now. I do have them now, but they're there to really, because of doing some of the things that help me. So when I come home, I come into a relaxed environment. Mm-hmm. But also the ones that we have here are pretty good. So they start getting involved with the children. If they make the mess, they're going to make their own, they've got to tidy up, so that they get involved in that sense. It's more of a safety thing now, but it also gives me the opportunity, if I need to just drop the hat and go to an emergency appointment, I can do that. Support
which
people.
You probably have taught your children. You've taught your children and laid the foundations. You've probably laid some very solid foundations, so they're ready to be given the wings to fly. You know, they're flying now. So you've put down the ground.
I don't know about that. So this is the thing. This nature versus nurture. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to share a story about, you know, the environment that we live in. My daughter, I think she would have been 6, and I came down the stairs a little bit too fast, and I slipped, and I and I landed on my coccyx. At the time, I thought it was fractured. I was in a lot of pain. I think there may have been an expletive. No, I try and stay away from it as a practice, but I may have done something that said, ow, you know, and I might have been a bit, I might have verbalized it. My daughter walks down the stairs, and I'm like, and then she went to the table and started to draw. And once I'd come to my senses, I'd asked her, I said, can you get Dad a drink? Because I'm in a lot of pain. Give me some water. So I took some water. And when I'd got to my senses, I thought I've got to have to ask. So I went to her and I said to her, did you see your dad in pain? She's like, yep. I said, so what did you think? Did you not think about empathizing? She's, I don't know. She goes, I'm not a doctor. What could I do? It was a perfectly logical response.
Yeah.
And so my Amani doesn't have empathy as a natural state. Aisha is full of love and cuddles, and if she sees somebody's crying, she cries herself. She's very empathetic, whereas Amani isn't. But Amani has been taught. So now she's here at 10. And she slowly built herself up. So to begin with, she would like sit there with her sister. Oh, that's okay. And then she'd look up to me and go, smashed it, Dad, got it, see this, empathizing. It is almost like that. So I believe it can be taught. She's still not at the same level naturally as her sister, but she's been dealt a hand. So her genetics have played a part in building her ability to have empathy. And we do the rest and we carry on. It's a little bit like asking me now, we're going to give you the best football coach and we want you to be like David Beckham. And I'm going to be like, okay, you can give me the best coaching, you can immerse me in the environment, but I'm not going to be able to bend it like Beckham, if you forgive me quoting the film. Same thing with my daughter. She's not got to have a huge amounts of empathy, but we can give her the tools to make sure she's developing and getting better at it.
So the importance of appreciating individual difference, even in the family, in the classroom, in the workplace.
Absolutely.
And the beauty of individual difference is coming loud and clear from that.
The beauty of individual difference. You've said this about in the classroom, and yet what we do is we say we are going to give a test that will standardize everything. And we are going to value you based on your ability to learn information for the short period of time and then regurgitate it into a test formula that we see fit. Now that to me is ridiculous because you're only really appreciating a certain part, and individuality has been lost on the education system.
And it actually remains with them throughout life. I would even see it with my own children, even myself. I think of the state exam, and even at this stage in my life, having had a bad dream that I actually missed an exam, it's amazing the imprint it leaves on you, you know. But even in university, going back to study psychology and sitting in with...
Okay, I'm going to make room for the couch for you. You can come in.
Sitting in with the 20-somethings to do exams, and the relic of what I've been taught with about exams and trying to shake that off in later life was unbelievable. But you have a beautiful 7R learning powers. Explain it to us. I think you sent me a clip, and I did use it in one of my trainings, one of my talks with second level teachers and first level teachers, and it's gorgeous. It's simple, but it's so applicable in the education setting.
Right. So the 7R learning powers was something that I designed. It was based on, I looked at Howard Gardner's work as well on multiple intelligence. I thought the most important thing was the process of learning. So what we did, we had a number of posters, and these were all added to aliens. They're the 7Rs. It'll be like resourceful, responsive, resilient, etc., respectful. And these 7Rs are now placed around the school classroom. Once we're doing this on Zoom, I've seen a lovely guy, Mr. Zahir, who's a math teacher, and he has it and he shares his screen, it pops up. So for example, when Mr. Zahir was there, I observed him a while ago when he was doing a class, and he would say something along the lines, he gave it a mathematical problem, 3 times 3, so he goes 9, 4 times 3, 12, 5 times 3, 15. Well done, excellent. I'm not quite pushing your levels, but I'll try this again future. And then he asks another question, and he sort of like, not just, he still says well done to the kid, but not over the top. The next one, he tries it and he struggles getting the answer. 3 times 3, and he's like, oh, is it 6? He's like, okay, well, no, not quite. It's the multiplication, it's not the addition. And he does something, and the kid starts to work it out, and he goes through this formula, and then he gets it. And then that's when he clicks on the button, and the thing goes, well done, great students. What do great students do? And they go, never give up. And you hear the kids go, never give up, before it comes on the screen. And then he goes, that's right, great students, never give up. That's about being resilient. And I loved your resilience, Marshall. And he starts telling this kid about his resilience. And all the kids are saying, great students never give up. So the other kid just went and smashed through 3 or 4 answers very quickly. This one struggles. But now what we're doing is we are conditioning. The positive reinforcement here is on the process of learning, not just with the individual, but with all the peers around. And Ahmed, who's obviously aced it, doesn't really care about getting the right result. It's about the process. So the process of being resilient was quite prevalent in his lesson. So I asked him about how did he do this in the classrooms, and it was an ingenious way. So he makes these A3 posters and he places them on the wall with sticky back paper with Velcro. And what happens, they're around the classroom. And then in the first week, it's resilience is the first on the left. So as he turns around, it's resilience. But then as the time goes, the second week, the third weeks, they take them off and they move them around the classroom. So when they go, great students, and they get to resilience, they go, oh no, now it's respectful. Great students. So there's additional learning of another process that's taking place. So that's what I think is immersed in these particular children over here, is that they have a very strong sense of learning purpose.
Very good. And it's entering all of this positive language into their whole vocabulary as well. But what it's doing is showing them the actual play out of it and how it actually works. And they internalize it. Yeah?
Absolutely. And the thing is, they stay away from, when it comes to validation of kids, if they're getting answers done very quickly, the way he uses his language to suggest that, I've not challenged you enough today, Charles, but we'll come back to that. Instead of saying, well, I see other kids going, awesome, amazing, you're high fives, let's give out lots of stickers and sweets because you're great because you got the answers correct. The positive reinforcement was placed on the process of learning, and that's where the value took place.
And I suppose if it's overused or not used carefully, it could become hackneyed or meaningless. So I can see how he's using it. He's retaining the value and he's retaining the respect for the individual child and the individual differences. And there's a type of differentiation being at play at the root of it as well, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'm very fortunate that he is a wonderful teacher. He came on one of the accelerated learning programs that I designed, and I could watch him grow. And then since then, he's one of these teachers that he just wants to. I've never seen such a thirst for knowledge. He inspires me. He inspires me to want to learn and do more because he's got such this drive about him. Yeah. What else can I do to serve my children? He's always constantly looking, how can I serve these kids better? And I think that's what stands him apart.
Yes, and that is my whole thesis. What legacy are we leaving our young? Because they are the future, you know. But we're here talking using Zoom, 3,500 miles between us. Now there's such a convenience with it. I don't think we'll ever revert to what we were doing in the past, driving here, there, and everywhere, and flying everywhere. But in actual fact, it has its upsides, but it has its downsides also. We need the communication face to face. If down the line, there's part of me that wonders, are our present systems of education and educating our young being rendered not fit for purpose going forward? But there's part of me that says also we need the face-to-face, we need the tactile. What do you think?
Okay, I believe that the advent of these platforms has come because of the pandemic. It's almost been enforced upon us because of the situation, and we've made best of what we can do. Do I believe that we should be in the classrooms? Absolutely. Being in the classrooms, you can see things that you can't see over a Zoom. I've seen classrooms where the children, there's been no videos, so you don't really know how engaged they are. Very difficult I've done a Zoom platform. I did one for Dubai Police Academy, and we've got 100 of their senior leaders there. I did one for the universities, and half of them have got their cameras closed. When I was doing lectures over here, and we had a large amount of people, because it was Saudi Arabia, I didn't make it compulsory to turn the videos on. When I'm in other areas, it must be compulsory. You must have your video but I'll mute you. But your video must be on because I can see the engagement.
That's right.
With over here, some of the females that they were covered, so they said, I'm just having no video. And then I got to see some really funny things. So there was a couple of things. One was a lady shopping. She was in her local supermarket and was doing her shopping whilst doing the lecture. And she didn't know that her video had turned on. But the funniest one was a lady who was, and if she's watching this, she'll know who you are. She's a C, I'm not going to say, but yeah, I can do. She was a dean. She was a very, very senior person, and she was doing her vacuuming in her t-shirt and some cycling shorts, I imagine, and was dancing and jiggling away. And then all of a sudden, it closed. So she didn't realize that a video was open, and I was there and I can see her. I don't know how many of the others, and we had, I think there was about 70 plus that were on this. So I don't think they could see, but I could see. A little bit off-putting, and I didn't want to draw attention to it. So there is that. Clearly, an engagement level is what's lacking when it comes to these platforms. I think they have a purpose, they have a use. But they're not going to take away my ability to see someone face to face. I get to see things face to face. So for example, right now, if I'm nervous, you don't get to see the old knee twitching away. But if if I'm there face to face, part of that body language I may notice and pick up as they start communicating with me. I listen very closely to the language. I listen intently to the body language, the appearance. I look at eyes, the eye movement, eye direction. We look at pace and intonation of voice and whether that changes. So in a one-to-one session, when I'm sat there, it's very intense. You have to have a very high level of concentration as a therapist, and that I could never lose. You can't, if you do this on a Zoom, it has. You can't. I've got one coming up very in fact, it's coming up this weekend on Saturday. I have an appointment with a particular person, but he's just had his a COVID test. So we're going to do it online, and that's his choice. And then we'll reaffirm later on.
Have you ever used the mapping online? I imagine that EI mapping tool that you use, if you're introducing it to a school or a company, it would not be as effective online as it would be you face to face.
I totally agree with you. And this is the part where it has to go online. It has to be digitized. And let me explain why. As a person, I can speak to you, and maybe you could, sell it to your audience, etc., and it gets diluted. So my one-to-one sessions, with my team over here, I've just had another member just come up the stairs now. So another one we can come up now. We can have that. They get value. Now the map, yes, it will be diluted, but I can hit the masses by digitizing it.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's a professor from MIT, and she is a nuclear science professor. And then she's gone to her department, app development, and they're going to start developing this app, and they're going to digitize the map. And this is where I think it could be quite powerful. So imagine now your students, and if you were the head of the rector or the dean of the university, imagine that the map in this format is now on a mobile phone. And before you go into any of your lectures, you are going to, with a sliding scale, have the intensity of the anger line, the relevance line, the happiness line. So you'll rate your intensity.
Sure.
Now then, imagine this. I want you to imagine that you're actually the dean now, and I'll be one of your lecturers. So I'm one of your lecturers, and then after 4 weeks, you're going to come and knock on my door, Mr. Garner, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Do you realize that for the last 4 weeks, 78% of your students are either distracted, bored, or frustrated?
Very good. Yeah.
What do you think we can do about it? So now, instead of you as, if you think about the team at the university where they have, how many observations do they do?
Sure.
How many buzz observations do they do? How often do we have a look at their curriculum, etc.? But this is very different. We're now looking at the feelings and the emotions of our students. But the great thing is this data would not only just go to you as the dean or the headmaster, it would also go to the student. It would also go to the teacher. It would also go to the parent. So Mr. Garner, being as a diligent teacher as I am, I would like to think so anyway, after the second week, I'm thinking, wow. So third week, my students are coming back to me. I'm going to say, hey guys, I've noticed that some of this content is not being delivered as well as it could be. What can we do to make this more engaging for you? This is about, and clearly I would change my pattern to match the students' needs. So I think this not only goes to develop, it takes the workload off from the heads of department and the headmasters and the deans and the rectors, clearly. We're also focusing on how we can support the emotional literacy of the students as well.
Yeah.
But where I see this being really big would be in the United States. Very recently, I read a report. They were talking about arming teachers. They want to give teachers the ability to have guns, and it was in response to a mass shooting at a school.
Sure. Yeah.
So when I read this, I was like, wow. But at the same time, what you realize, the person who did the mass shooting, and as sad as it is, he did not just jump to rage. It would have been building up over a period of time. It doesn't happen instantaneously. There's no switch that causes him to go and shoot people. He would have been, and let's have a look, if we looked at the map carefully, he would have felt distracted in class. He then would have got to boredom and then frustration. His frustration would have led him to negative behavior, which transfers onto the anger line, but he could have also been lost. And his loss would have led to neglect and then rejection and then demoralized, and before he gets to depressed. And then he would have had these actions. It takes a while. It doesn't happen overnight. I believe that if they had the app, and if every kid had this app, if every student had it, and we had the ability to read these reports, we could proactively say, there's a direction. We are failing our kids, and we'll do it early. Why are we having a look at performance reviews of teachers? When are they done? At the end of the year. Let's have a look.
When the damage is
too late
done.
now. You damage your student.
Absolutely.
Let's do it early.
So the student would feed in how they're feeling. How would it gather the information?
I imagine what they do is there's a map and there's an intensity line. They put it on how they're feeling, and they get to also record what days they have these feelings. So they can actually input Monday, every Monday at 4 o'clock, Monday morning, Tuesday night, they get to choose. And there's also a randomizer as well. So we can start tracking how people have been feeling. It could be that I get anxiety every time I see Teresa. And Teresa puts me on Zoom and I'm like, oh, my knees are going, I'm getting nervous. And then we start practicing and say, well, what is it? Is it the relationship that we have with her? Is it the fact that you have to go on camera? And then you can start managing those emotions more effectively. You get to almost be, instead of emotions driving us, we get to understand our emotions, recognize the intensity, make slight adjustments to make sure that we've got an accurate result of how we're feeling. And then it's about looking at what emotions should I employ to reach my objective? What emotions? And for sometimes it could be anger. I can give you an example of that. My daughter came in and she's 4 years old, and there's a group of people around, and there was some music, and she pulls down the pajamas and went cheeky wawa, and shook her little tush. Now clearly I thought that was hilarious, and I started to laugh. I took one look at my wife, who just gave me the look. I knew straight away then I need to engage in anger. So I would say, that's naughty. Don't do that. And that was my understanding my emotions, recognize that I need to engage in another emotion to get the objective across.
Very good. Very good. So will technology, in your opinion, remain man's tool for success, or do we risk rewiring our young brain towards a dependence on technology? In other words, as sentient beings, what will help us to retain our lead over technology, using technology as the tool, not the master?
Right. I think that's a lovely question, and it's a very difficult one. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, I would say that I don't look at this as either a binary, have we won or lost? It's not like that. There is an intensity of how much that we use technology. I think it was the Vashti who wrote The Machine Stops, and in the end these guys were just big blobs with nothing, and he was everything was computerized, everything was done for them. We're not there yet, but we are certainly getting a more dependent mode on our technology. Even simply my mobile phone. I mean, it's something that I do as a therapist when I'm in session. I make a conscious effort to show them the mobile phone. This is my mobile. I'm just going to put it on silent, and I don't just leave it inside. I take it and it gets placed inside my bag, inside my blazer, and my blazer's hung up. So they know that I've completely disconnected from technology, and then my focus is on you.
Sure.
If it's a laptop, or even if the laptop is shut, if it's a computer screen, what I do is I turn the computer screen towards the client. I click on the mute button, and then I turn the screen off. Then the screen gets placed towards me, but they know that there's a physical act of cognitively detached from technology.
So
that's
you're
what
giving
we should
full attention to them.
Absolutely. You need to be present in that moment.
You know, I have been reading recently predictions as to how school will look in the future. And the World Economic Forum were citing different suggestions from the OECD, etc., and that will school no longer just be a place where we learn anywhere, anytime, on the move. Perhaps we will learn with more dependence on technology, etc., etc. And it struck me, are we headed fast towards a great divide between those that get on well through education systems or education and those that don't? For instance, take the special needs child, take the child from a lower socioeconomic group, take the well-off child. Will that type of division become more pronounced? The divisions of the past that we felt we had gotten rid of. But should education become like a menu, anywhere, anytime, etc.? Will it be more open to some than others?
I think that's already happened. You know, there is certain levels of education, you know, that people can pay for. I've got some of my team, you know, that the very, very high level educationists, they're accelerated learning program providers, and they charge a high amount hourly sessions, but they're very good at what they do. So unfortunately, yes, that you're right. The very best of what we have to offer is not open to everyone. It's open to those that can afford it. And that's what's happened in this world. If you have a look at it, you know, where is the financial distribution? It's in the minority. It's sure. The majority of money is left with the minority. I don't see that division getting any less. You know, it's such a tough question when it comes to education. In some ways, I think that the level of education could be is going to be diluted, but put on these platforms. I mean, it could be open to all. So therefore, there could be children, because there's an online capability. If you have an internet connection, then you are able to have this. You're able to have access to this education. There's a school that we're hoping to open up in Somalia. So we bought some land in Somalia where we're going to build a mosque, a school, and an orphanage. And what I would like to be able to do is with the H2 Academy, which is, I would like to think we have got the very best experts in the field of education. And instead of having a school and making it online, which I think is ridiculous, you can't take 6 hours of schooling and say, we're going to have 6 hours of looking at a screen. It doesn't work. So you've got to take education and say, well, how much screen time can we have and still meet those needs? So, we've created this academy, but I look at it from a standpoint from economics. Yes, we get paid very well to deliver our particular product, but what we can do, because we get paid well, we can now offer that product to someone who just has internet. It's a diluted version, because obviously we go for the numbers. One-to-one sessions. If I gave you a one-to-one session to support your development, that's going to be far better than if I said, oh, by the way, I'm doing a development workshop and it's going to be done with 100 people.
Sure.
So although we're diluting it, we're still giving the platform for them to see the experts.
And where is your H2 in action at the minute? The H2 Academy.
Oh, the H2 Academy. The H2 Academy is, I've got the principal here right in front of me, who's actually come up to probably say something about it. But I believe that they are at a stage where, in fact, I'm going to ask, when do you hope to start? When do you actually hope to go live?
September.
Okay.
September.
That's disappointing. They're hoping September. Yeah, I was hoping that they was going to do something. I believe that they're also going to be doing something during Ramadan. So during Ramadan, there is going to be a period of some of our classes and what we can expect for social and emotional learning. I think, is that correct? Yes. She's not even saying yes. She's just nodding furiously. Yep.
I will come back to you on that one. We might do a full session on that after September.
Bringing emotional intelligence into it to see the different aspects that we can employ.
There we go.
That would connect with what is needed to happen in Ramadan and part of EQ and spirituality that we can connect together.
Did you get any of that?
Yeah.
I'll just trying to recap then. Basically, during the spirituality of Ramadan, they're trying to immerse the religious aspect with social and emotional learning and show how the connectivity is there. So it's not done because they have to do it. They're doing it because there's a value to them.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, it sounds very interesting. I'd be interested to see how it develops and how it grows. So would you say, for instance, that we're living in a time of great promise, a time where you can be anything you want to be, or have we cause to fear unless we pull back and take the reins back, take our power back a little?
I would suggest that's up to every single individual. So I think whenever there is challenge and there is opportunity, doesn't just disappear. It changes from one form to another.
Right.
So for example, let's say that during the pandemic, and people go, "Oh wow, I've lost my jobs. Oh woe is me," because now people aren't going to the bars. People aren't flying. People are socially distanced. They're not going to the gyms. I had a gym. I had a barber's. and they can't do something. If you focus on what you can't do, then you're not really going to be engaging on what you can do. So you need to be able to recognize that the hand that you've been dealt, it is a bad hand, but what can I do with it? And that's where the promise comes. So that's where someone has to look for opportunity, because opportunity, money was going to the gym. If it's not going to the gym, if it's not going to the barbers, if it's not going to the flights abroad, it's going somewhere. It doesn't just stop.
Sure.
It's about finding the opportunity. So when people say about the promise, I would say this up to every individual. And that's why I want to focus on the learning aspects, the processes of learning in the school. The H2 Academy, we have a leadership elective program. We have an entrepreneurship elective program. We have a journalism elective program. The social and emotional learning is not elective. It's compulsory. They have to have their English, math, science, and social and emotional learning. So, and the others are elective. We're on an international platform. I think that we need to be able to have that in our children. And I think if we start focusing on what can we do, what have we, then I think what you talked about, are we going backwards? I would say we can strive forwards.
Sure.
But we've got to get these children and the next generation the tools to do the job. We've got to teach parents. We've got to be able to teach the teachers, the educators. And also it's about going to industry and asking, what do you want?
Sure.
What do you want from your people?
Sure.
There's a lovely story I tell in one of my seminars where I explain about, it's my relationship with my father. My father's like my best mate. He's a lovely, lovely chap. We're very, very competitive, but he's also a man of wisdom. And I remember him telling me, son, if you study hard, you get your O levels, you'll be guaranteed to go to college. You've got to work hard. And he was right. Then at college, he said, you get your A levels, you work really hard, and I guarantee you'll get into a good university. And he was right. And at university, work hard, get your degree, and you can choose what job you want.
What you want to do. Yeah, the world is your oyster, yeah.
I cannot say that same story to my children because it's no longer the case. And I say this because recently I've looked at 400 doctors. They all went to either British, American, Canadian, or Australian universities. And then they came back to their university in places of high end. And still, the rector is saying, these are the things they're lacking. And they're lacking the 7 R's. They're lacking the best practices. They're lacking some of the softer skills and social emotional learning to make them better communicators, better connectors, and better motivators. And that's what was missing. And isn't it a shame that somebody has to go to a doctorate the other side of the world before coming back and say, hey, we got it wrong at school. We should be getting it right from the beginning.
From the beginning, laying the foundations, absolutely. So with that growth mindset, the world is in safe hands if we manage to get it early and on time. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
Can you hear in the background?
I hear yes.
Yeah, this is the Adhan. So these are all the mosques that are around now calling to prayer. So it's probably a great time to sign off. And thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope that this is just the start of a beautiful friendship and we can continue this valuable conversation.
Thank you. I hope so too. And I will come back to you with more. And if you have anybody you're associated with who'd like to join the conversation, asking the hard questions, please send them along.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.